Everything you think you know about T-Rex is wrong. And I don't mean a little wrong. The face is wrong, the hunting strategy is wrong, the timeline is wrong. And by the end of this, you're going to feel genuinely bad for it, which is a weird thing to feel about something that could bite through bone. At its peak, only around 20,000 T-Rex existed on the entire planet at once. Not 20,000 per continent, 20,000 total, fewer than the lions alive today. The most famous predator in history was barely there. And the reason comes down to the one thing everyone assumes made it unstoppable: the size. Size was T-Rex's superpower, and size was the thing slowly eating it alive from the inside out. The most dangerous animal in history, undone by the thing that made it dangerous. Evolution does this on purpose, I think. Think about what it actually cost to run that body. T-Rex needed roughly 140 to 160 pounds of meat per major feeding. Not to grow, not to recover, not to thrive. Just to keep the lights on at that size. That's roughly one adult lion's worth of meat. Per meal. Not per day. Per meal. I'll give you a second with that. It didn't feed every day, massive bursts, then long stretches with nothing. Which means every hunt was a biological deadline. Miss it and the chain of failures starts. A smaller predator can pick off rodents, insects, whatever's nearby between big kills. T-Rex couldn't do that. The caloric return on small prey was rounding error for a body that size. At 8 tons, catching a rabbit isn't a snack. It's an insult. Locked into the biggest, most dangerous animals in its environment. Every time. The bigger it got, the more trapped it became inside its own requirements. It wasn't built for dominance. It was built to constantly need. Which is a terrible thing to be when you're also the largest predator on the continent. Which means it couldn't afford a single bad hunt. Not one. And none of that is even the embarrassing part. The face. Every Jurassic Park poster. Every action figure. Every nightmare from 1993. That image. Teeth permanently exposed, wet and glistening, hanging slightly open. A 2023 study published in Science says the face you know never existed. T-Rex had lips. Thin, scaly, lizard-like lips covering every single tooth when its mouth was closed. The evidence. T-Rex enamel wore evenly on both sides. Exactly what you'd expect from teeth that were protected. Crocodile enamel doesn't. Permanently exposed teeth wear unevenly. T-Rex enamel didn't. The skull anatomy mirrors modern lipped lizards, not open-mouthed reptiles. The researchers found no structural reason for the teeth to be exposed at rest. So the most iconic predator face in history was a prop. 30 years. Every poster, every toy, every birthday cake. Wrong face. We were very committed to being wrong about wrong face. And a wrong face usually means a wrong story. So what was the hunt actually like? You probably picture T-Rex as an aggressive, dominant predator actively running things down. Fossil track patterns say it moved deliberately, not sprinting. And the fossil that says it clearest. A Hadrosaur vertebra with a T-Rex tooth still buried in the bone. Surrounding tissue had started to heal. The prey got away, and the strike came from behind. Not an open field sprinter. An ambush predator that hunted the sick, the old, and the already dying. Because at 8 tons, going after a healthy adult of anything is how you get yourself killed. T-Rex dominated through patience, which is the correct strategy and also the least cinematic thing I've ever typed. The problem is what patience cost at 8 tons. At 8 to 9 tons, a stumble wasn't just embarrassing. Ground impact forces from a fall, approximately 6 times its own body weight. Enough to shatter leg bones on contact. A head hitting the ground from standing height wasn't survivable at that size. Sue, the most complete T-Rex ever found, shows healed broken ribs, shoulder damage, healed leg fractures. T-Rex could survive injuries, but those were survivable hits. A fall at speed was genuinely different math. 6 times body weight, no arms to break the fall. 2 elephant weights of animal hitting the ground with nothing between its skull and the dirt. Someone in evolution really should have caught that in review. One bad step at real speed was a death sentence, so it moved carefully, every step calculated, which makes the next part almost funny. It was never built for the top to begin with. You picture apex predator from birth. The reality, T-Rex spent its first 14 years as prey-sized. Juveniles weighed under 100 pounds. Slender, fast, built like a completely different animal. Early scientists found juvenile specimens and genuinely thought they belonged to separate species. They didn't. It was just a T-Rex that hadn't loaded in yet. And for those 14 years, oviraptors, dromaeosaurids, even some larger mammals could eat it. The apex predator of the Cretaceous spent over a decade as a snack. Let that land. The superpower came with a 14-year loading screen, so it finally grows up, except growing up took much longer than you'd assume. A 2026 study in PRJ analyzed 17 T-Rex specimens. T-Rex didn't reach full adult mass until age 35 to 40. Not 18, not 25, 35 to 40 years. The animal you picture, fully built, 8 tons, apex everything, took longer to finish than most human careers. You could get a PhD, have a midlife crisis, and still not be done becoming a T-Rex. It put on roughly 4 to 7 pounds per day between ages 14 and 18, then a long, slow grind to full size. And by the mid-20s, before it even finished growing, arthritis and bone infections were already showing up. Actual window at the top, roughly 10 to 12 years. 100 million years of Tyrannosauroid evolution, converging on about a decade. If you ran the math on that as a business, you'd shut it down. But the weapon those 10 years were built around had a problem, and it starts with what the skull was actually made of. The bite force you've read about was real. 8,000 to 12,800 pounds per square inch across the jaw, per tooth pressure enough to crack the femur of a triceratops. No land animal before or since has matched it. It crushed bone to extract marrow, something almost no other predator could do. But the same skull was built like a honeycomb inside, hollow air chambers running through the bone, strong under one specific force, biting straight down. Hit it from the side and that structure was vulnerable. The most powerful bite in land animal history had one direction. That's it. 1. Imagine designing the world's strongest safe and only making it lockable from the front. The strongest bite in history. One direction. That's the deal. Here's the part where T-Rex briefly looks impressive again. The vision was 13 times sharper than yours. Far point around 6 kilometers, it could see you from miles away, which, if you happen to be on the menu, is not a great number to hear. And before you feel good about hiding, the nose had 620 to 645 smell processing genes. Sue has grapefruit-sized smell centers in the brain, nearly identical to modern cats, better than most birds. It could smell you from kilometers away and see you from even further, simultaneously. This is the part where hiding behind a tree starts to feel like a real waste of your last few minutes. And then the catch. The field where both eyes worked together was 55 degrees. Yours is 120. 13 times the acuity. Locked inside a tunnel. And the skull weighed approximately 600 pounds. You know this because Sue's actual skull is in storage at the Field Museum. They couldn't mount it, too heavy. So the most famous skull in paleontology sits in a box while a copy takes the credit. I find that detail genuinely funny for reasons I can't fully explain. 600 pounds of bone every time it needed to look somewhere else. And then there was the animal waiting on the other side of all of that. An 8-ton predator needed massive prey, and there weren't many options, so it hunted Triceratops, which is a little like being the world's best safecracker, and the only available safe being actively trying to stab you. Triceratops was 6 to 9 tons of bony frill and 3 horns, pointed directly at the hollow sides of T-Rex's skull. Taking it down required lateral engagement, the exact move that exposed the weakest part of that honeycomb skull to those horns. Triceratops could pivot fast, keeping the frill between itself and the threat at all times. T-Rex wasn't just hunting a dangerous animal, it was hunting the animal whose entire defense specifically targeted the one structural weakness it couldn't afford to expose. Evolution really committed to the bit on both sides. T-Rex didn't hunt Triceratops because it was a good idea. It did it because there was nothing else big enough. And after all of that, the metabolic trap, the 14-year loading screen, the 35-year wait, the hollow skull, the locked vision, the decade-long window, hunting Triceratops on a biological deadline. There were still the arms. You've heard about the arms. Everybody has. That's actually the least interesting part of this story. The arms could generate approximately 430 pounds of bicep curl force, 3.5 times stronger than yours. Range of motion, 40 degrees at the shoulder, 45 at the elbow. Built for gripping struggling prey close during a bite. That's it. They couldn't reach the mouth. 430 pounds of force. On a 3-foot arm, on a 40-foot animal, powerful enough to matter. Short enough that nothing it actually needed to do was in range. It's less a fatal flaw and more a punchline at the bottom of a very long list. But here's the thing about all of it. Every trait that made T-Rex the most powerful land predator in history also made it fragile in exactly one specific way. The size required a food supply nothing else could maintain. The bite force came locked to a skull that couldn't take a sideways hit. The speed it had was lethal if it tripped. The vision was 13 times sharper than yours and still locked mostly forward, on 600 pounds of bone that didn't rotate easily. It took 35 years to build. It ran for maybe 10. And only 20,000 existed at once across the entire western interior of North America. For context, there are more wild wolves alive today. Wolves, the animal that lost a government-funded war to farmers and came back anyway. The T-Rex you picture as the unstoppable ruler of the Cretaceous was one of the rarest large animals on the planet at any given moment. The most dangerous animal in history spent half its life being hunted, and the other half one bad step away from starvation. That's not a design flaw. That's just what it looks like when evolution pushes something all the way to the edge. And at the very edge, there's no margin left. One bad hunt, one stumble, one Triceratops horn at the wrong angle. That's all it took. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, and drop in the comments which predator you think actually had the worst deal. Styxor out.